Hello, and welcome to my presentation on budgeting and financial planning at Kentucky Community Colleges. I'm John Brown, and I want to say right off the first thing that I've been struggling this week with some sort of allergies or asthma, which has affected my voice a little bit. I don't think it's coronavirus, hopefully, but this may affect my voice here in this presentation, so I apologize for that. Please bear with me. Okay, so this presentation I've divided into 6 parts. I want to begin by just talking about general concepts in budget and financing and how budgets are managed to give some context for what we're dealing with in Kentucky. Then I want to zero in and focus on what's happened in Kentucky over the past 25 years or so. I want the reforms that happened there beginning in 1997. Then I want to talk about how these reforms have been successful, what they have done well, and then discuss areas where they either have not been successful or at least need revision. And finally, I want to close with talking about some ways that we can possibly address these problems moving forward. First, I want to begin by simply just some basic definitions here. I mean, everybody hopefully knows what a budget is, but a sort of a textbook definition of it would be an estimate or expected income and expense for a given period of time, and a snapshot of plans of operation based on that estimate. This allows for administrators to view a picture of the effects of decisions that they made. A budget is a way to signal priorities. You can tell what an institution cares about and values if you look at its budget and see what it spends resources on. It also allows for what-if assessments. You can investigate and see what the likely effects are of investing here or cutting funds there. There's two types of budgets in higher education: operating budget, which you might consider the main budget. This is the plan of revenue to be generated and expenditures from that revenue over a finite period of time, often a year. This is based on revenue and expense projections. These projections are based on things like the state of the economy, expected enrollment, expected state revenue, expected gifts, things like that. The other type of budget is a capital budget, and this is used for renovations, for new buildings, for remodeling, things like that. You have to maintain your parking lot, you have to maintain your buildings, you have to sometimes build new buildings, replace roofs. These would all be examples of things that would come in the capital budget. Where do institutions get their revenue from? Well, there's a number of places. Tuition, probably the most obvious. This is applicable at most institutions. Most institutions do require tuition. How dependent an institution on it is varies by institution, but it's an important factor at pretty much all institutions. Student fees are another source of revenue. Students pay like a technology fee or a activities fee. These are things that go into the budget as well. If it's a public institution, state appropriations are going to play a role. This is money that the state provides to an institution. This is not really, or much less, or maybe not a factor at all at private institutions. Bigger universities, particularly those that are more elite or more dependent on their endowment, this is their investment income. Contracts and grants, overhead costs for facilities. If an institution has facilities that it rents out, it can raise revenue through that. Gifts from alumni or community members, merchandise they sell, and other sources. These all can be sources of revenue. Expenses, maybe salaries and benefits for employees. Library needs books, needs professional membership fees, needs subscriptions. These cost money. You have to have electricity, you have to have air conditioning and heating, you have to have running water for utilities. Financial aid or scholarships, if they come out of the institution's pocket, they are an expense. You have to renovate buildings periodically. You should at least put money in reserves in case there's a emergency down the line. A rainy day fund policies may require money to be spent, so you have, like, for example, Title IX or something like that, or accessibility, which are obviously good policies, but they do cost some money, so you have to budget for these. Other parameters would be, is the funding recurring or non-recurring? Does it happen every year or not? Is it restricted or not restricted? In other words, is the money earmarked specifically for a certain department or project, or is it not? If it's non-restricted, it may be segmented further than that. So, moving forward, let's get into Kentucky right now. Beginning in the mid to late 1990s, there were some major reforms with the Kentucky Community and Technical Colleges system. They were specifically reorganized and combined into a single system of 16 two-year comprehensive colleges. And this would be a system that will serve a little over 106,000 students. The reforms began under former Governor Patton, who was elected in 1995 and oversaw the Post-Secondary Education Improvement Act of 1997. The goal of these reforms was to make Kentucky Community and Technical Colleges the best system in the nation. This can be done through avoiding duplication, create economies of scale. You don't need 10 different people doing the same job. If one or two will suffice, that frees up resources that can be invested in other places. You can also hopefully streamline the transfer process, make it easier and simpler for students to transfer from a two-year college to a university to complete their bachelor's work. Also, particularly in your AAS and workforce development programs, you want to make sure that the workforce you're producing is one that there is a demand for, so that we can better serve the economic needs of the state. Governance in Kentucky. The Kentucky Community and Technical College system oversees all the community and technical colleges in the state. Each college has a president and a board of directors, so there is central management plus local management. You want to balance centralization, which can be more efficient, but you also want to be sensitive to local needs. The economic needs and job force needs in Harlan, Kentucky may be very different, certainly are, I'm sure, very different than in Louisville, Kentucky. So some local governance is needed to account for this. The Kentucky Community and Technical Colleges System, or the KCTCS, the acronym is almost as difficult to say as actually saying it in its entirety, works in each college prepares a request for an annual budget based on their strategic plans, local input, and the needs of local and statewide business and industry. As typical, each request for funding must include a justification for why this is important. This is submitted to the first level, who then either approves it or denies. If they approve it, they attach a priority rating to it, how high, which tells how high a priority is, and then it works its way up through the system. The funding models serve only as a starting point. Funding is based on adequacy and equity. Capital requests are done separately. Have these reforms worked? Well, if you were evaluating them in 2010, the answer would have seemingly been a resounding yes. Over that period of time, we saw major increase in accessibility and enrollment. I think 95% of Kentucky residents were within a 30-minute drive of an institution of higher learning. Nearly 106,000 people trained through community economic development and fire and rescue programs in 2007 alone. There was a 560% increase in credentials awarded by colleges over the decade ending in 2006 to 2007. There were nearly 3,000 new programs, diplomas, concentrations, options, and certificates approved. There were huge growth in online programs and courses. Online education really, of course, took off as well during that time in general. And good news, there was generally strong equity and performance across ethnic, gender, and age lines among students in online courses, according to a 2012 study. So all this is certainly good news, and it suggests that the reforms did work, at least in the short term. Looking at them in 2020, looking at the state of Kentucky higher education in 2020, though, there seem to be some problems. First, one survey from 2012 found that the KCTCS's customer service was lacking. Emails were not answered. Phone calls were not answered or returned. There was generally just many people who attended these institutions or prospective students were disappointed in the customer service they received. Obviously, this is harmful because prospective students are less likely to enroll if they experience this, and current students are likely to go tell their friends and family about this as well, which creates a bad reputation for the institutions, which leads to fewer people enrolling. A Jensen and Harov study from 2018 found that transfer agreements for AAS, Associate of Applied Science degrees, had a lot of problems. When students transferred to four-year universities, they had trouble getting credit for that. This is a pretty difficult problem because AAS degrees are designed to be terminal degrees, so they weren't designed for transfer. However, the world has changed in the last 20 years, and whereas a Associate of Applied Science degree may have been the requirement for a job in 2000, 2020, a bachelor's degree may be desirable. So how can we help these students that want to go back and earn bachelor's degrees? Low income and underprepared students have significantly lower rates of attaining associate's degrees. This was from a Davidson study in 2015. Probably the most obvious one that's going to jump out at you is, though, enrollment declined by 28% from 2010 to 2016. This was also happened at the same time that state funding was drastically cut. So we see a huge decline in enrollment. Predictably, we also see 500 positions being cut in the KCTCS system. So these are all problems. How do we fix them? Here's what I would suggest. One is we need to improve customer service. At the very least, we need to train staff to better handle questions and concerns and to better serve students. And monitor them to make sure this is happening. It may be, we don't know, we'll need more study to know this. It could be that we're shorthanded. If so, we may need to invest in more support staff. It may be that we have adequate staff, that just for whatever reason they're not accomplishing this. If so, we need to ensure that they do. The AAS transfer programs are very complicated, again, because they weren't designed to be transfer programs. Nonetheless, we do have an obligation to students who earned those degrees in the past when they were what was desired. We have an obligation to help them as much as possible get what they need. So I would recommend representatives from these programs, from the community and technical colleges, meet with local business leaders and state business leaders to find out what would be a good way, and as well as universities, four-year universities, have all these stakeholders come together and hopefully hammer out some way where we can streamline this process. Something that we might also look into would be success coaches. Here at Roane State in Tennessee, for example, success coaches have correlated with a big increase in outcomes for students. Success coaches could possibly deal with the underserved and low-income students, provide support for them, could also perhaps improve customer service as well. So this might be something we could invest in that could at least address more than one problem. Of course, the biggest problem is we need to get enrollment up again. And how do we do this? I would recommend that we meet with business and industry leaders to evaluate the programs we currently have and see if they're still meeting needs. And if we need new programs, we need to launch new programs. If the programs we have are not meeting economic needs, we need to revise them and revamp them so that they do. We also need to evaluate how our students who transfer to universities are doing, see how we can improve their outcomes. Tennessee, which is maybe the state most like Kentucky, has largely avoided a lot of these problems over the last decade. One of the reasons we have has been probably the Tennessee Promise program, which is called on nationally, and there's been many other states and localities have adopted similar programs. Maybe Kentucky could look into this as well. I would certainly recommend that. I'm not saying it's certainly not going to be a magic bullet that's going to solve all problems, but it would increase access to the KCTCS system, and it certainly would probably boost enrollment. So that is the end of my presentation. As you can see, my sources are right here. If you have any questions or concerns, please leave me a comment. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to me, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you.